So good afternoon, all. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. I'm kindly asking that we give some participants who are having difficulty joining some 5 minutes to enable them to join and be with us. I also recognize the presence of Professor Esther Kahangi. Karibu sana, Professor, to today's webinar.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I recognize the presence of John Nyaga, one of our discussants, and many more people. Thank you so much. I may not be able to mention your name, each one of you, but karibu sana. Give us some 5 minutes. We're still helping some people who are having difficulty joining. And then after 5 minutes, we start. Thank you once again. I welcome us all to this webinar on carbon finance. And today we want to unravel development of carbon project. This webinar is hosted by the Directorate of Research and Innovation at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. It's one of the series of webinars that we aim to conduct monthly with the intention of raising capacity and creating awareness on various aspects of research. Today, we have a team of 4 seasoned scientists who will be helping us to discuss the issues around climate finance in Kenya and also development of carbon projects. Our program will have a brief introduction of the webinar, especially the presenters. And then we'll have a presentation from John Nyaga on standard procedures in developing carbon projects. And then we'll have a presentation at 2:30 on regulatory framework for carbon finance, what we need to know so that we are on the right side of the law. And this one will be facilitated by Ruth Kerubo. And then we'll have our colleague George Tarus to take us through the current status of carbon markets in Kenya, giving us examples, especially with the background from Kenya Forestry Service. And we'll conclude our presentations from case studies by Anne Maina from Bumitra, looking at carbon projects in Kenya, and so that you can have some insights from case studies that they've been working on. We'll also provide a session for question and answers. So I kindly request that once you have your question, you can start writing it on the chat. We'll also be having an open platform where you can also speak your question. So allow me to introduce our participants. Our first presenter is John Nyaga, and John Nyaga is a graduate from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. Dr. Nyaga is an expert in natural climate solutions with over 10 years of experience and research in various fields on natural climate solutions. He has a PhD in plant science, an MSc in botany with a major in mycology, both from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. He's been engaged in different fields, in different aspects, especially in design, implementation, management of programs whose objective is sustainable agricultural land management in order to improve food security, climate change mitigation, and adaptation. He also has experience in handling various stakeholders, especially those involved in implementation of projects ranging from farming, non-governmental organizations, private sectors, and also government. Currently, John is a senior consultant with the Unique Land Use, and he previously worked with World Agroforestry Center, that is ICRAF, and One Acre Fund. The next presenter is Anne Maina. Anne is a seasoned professional with a rich background also in climate change and also agriculture. She has a bachelor's in horticulture from the University of Nairobi. She's an alumni of the Aspire Leadership Program of the Harvard University. Her career focuses on creating and bringing accessible solutions in the agriculture sector, especially those that increases resilience of farmers in the midst of climate shocks, and currently leads the carbon farming projects in East Africa. And this is where I mentioned that we'll be getting to know some case studies in the country from Bumitra. And then we'll have a presentation from Ruth Kerubo. Ruth Kerubo has a Bachelor of Law degree from Kabarak University, a postgraduate diploma in law from the Kenya School of Law, and she is currently doing a master's in environmental law at the University of Nairobi. Ruth is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya with an experience in environmental and climate law, commercial law, corporate and commercial law, as well as other branches of law. In addition, Ruth has participated in various environmental cases and also advising government on the best environmental law strategies and policies. We have George Karus, who is a forestry and climate change expert with over a decade experience in forestry and agroforestry system management. I personally know George because of his work in REDD, that's reducing emission from degradation and deforestation and forest degradation. And then he's also worked on landscape restoration. He's part of the technical working group on those programs in Kenya. George is closely associated with the Scientific Committee of the Forestry Society of Kenya. He's also a member of the Environmental Institute of Kenya, where he's registered as a lead expert on environmental impact assessment. So these are the colleagues who will be leading us through. And so for now, I want to welcome Dr. John Nyaga to lead us through the standard procedures for establishing carbon projects. John, do we share your screen or you use your screen, or Amos will help you share?
Thank you. I can use mine. Let me know when if you can see my screen.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Thank you, Dr.
We're not
Shem.
hearing you. We are not still hearing you. Are you hearing you?
Gets better. Sorry for that. Let me look for an option, a better option.
We are able to hear you.
I'll assume now you can hear me better.
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry for that. And you can see my screen?
Yes,
okay.
You can see.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to my introduction. And thank you, Dr. Shem, for organizing this webinar. Yes, I'm Dr. John Nyaga, as Dr. Shem talked about. And what I'll be taking you through this evening or afternoon is the standard procedures in developing a carbon project. And feel free to raise your hand and ask a question if you want some clarification as I proceed. Okay, so let me start by talking, having a small brief on what is a carbon project. And in so doing, I'll want to present to you two parts. Number one, think of who would be interested in coming up with a carbon project and what would be the purpose or what would be the need. So here you have company, government needing to meet their emission targets. And once you have that, then you proceed to have on the other side, someone who can do the same, who can do carbon offsets. And when we talk of carbon offsets, we're talking of someone or an organization which can plant trees or can distribute renewable energy sources, for example, the cook stoves, the solar powers. And then this carbon project comes along where now the company that needs meeting their emission targets reach out to the farmer groups or organizations which can plant trees and then provide them with investment. And this investment is aimed at coming up with a project that can lead to reduction of emissions. Then what do the person who is providing the investment get in return? What usually get is what we call a certificate for payment of carbon offsets, or they can get the verified emission reductions. This is practically a certificate that shows you've been able to reduce this amount of emissions, and it has a monetary value. It's an asset, okay? Then what is a carbon project in terms of what are you required to do for you to qualify, or your activities to qualify as a carbon project? So,
sorry, John, do you want to make the presentation mode? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so what do you have? Verified activities which reduce, avoid, or remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and contribute to mitigation of climate change. These are what are referred to a carbon project. And it has three aspects, main aspects. Number one, it can operate through reduction. When you talk of reduction, you can think of a cook stove project. Let's say you have a project that you want to distribute cook stoves to farmers or to communities. What happens is that these cook stoves are expected to use less charcoal or less fuel woods compared to conventional cook stoves. In so doing, what you're doing is then you're reducing the amount of emissions that would have been emitted by using the conventional cook stoves. In so doing, your activity leads to reduction. Number two, you can have avoidance, or avoidance is in case where, for example, you have a waste management company where you ensure that the waste are managed better, and therefore the waste does not go to the dump site, and there is no emission of greenhouse gases. In so doing, you've avoided what would have been emitted from these wastes, and therefore you are doing what we call avoidance. Thirdly and lastly is the removal. You have cases where, for example, when you plant a tree, we all know that once you plant a tree, through photosynthesis, it's able to utilize the carbon dioxide and emit oxygen. So what you're doing, you're already removing the carbon dioxide that is in the environment, and therefore that is a removal kind of a project. All these three aspects forms what is key in a carbon project. And it defines your activities as well. If you're setting up a carbon project, you'll have to define whether you're reducing, avoiding, or removing the greenhouse gases. Then the next is that what you notice that apart from removal of greenhouse gases, carbon project also target to have other core benefits, or to contribute to sustainable development goals. For example, let's say today you want to set up a carbon project where you'll be distributing trees to farmers, let's say in Kenya, and these farmers, you opt to distribute the fruit trees. In that case, these fruit trees, beyond sequestering carbon, they're expected to also produce fruits. And these fruits can have a number of impact to the farmer. Number one, they can be source of food. So you're improving food security, household food security. Number two, they can sell the fruits. So there's a source of income, improved livelihood for the farmers. So these are the core benefits. And you find most carbon projects will also try to see what are the additional core benefits that we are contributing to. Now going to the next is that as much as you want to do all these activity, one key component for a carbon project is that it must be real and it must be measurable. And simple as that. You will see there is quite a lot of back and forth and measurement and monitoring that are key, or that defines a carbon project. And here I have a loaded slide, sorry for this, but we are going to together to work on it. And it's what you will do if you want to set up a carbon project today. You are an individual or an organization or a company. Today, you decide I want to set up a carbon project. What are the steps that you need to do, or you'll go through? What are the timelines? And then we will discuss each of these. So number one, there are 5 steps. And step number 1, it's carbon project idea and feasibility. So this is where you come up with the idea. What do I want to do? Do I want to go into waste management? Do I want to go to agroforestry, afforestation? Do I want to go to clean cook stoves? And do I want to go to solar? That you define, you come up with the idea. And when you do that, it's required of you to do a pre-feasibility. And in this pre-feasibility is where you define the type of the project and also the scale. For example, if it's tree planting, how big do you want the project to be? Do you want to operate in a village? Do you want to operate in a county or sub-county, or even the whole country, or even multiple countries? That gives you define the scale. And out of that, number 2, you look into, based on the type, you look into a standard. We have carbon project have things we call standard, carbon standard. You get registered. Your carbon project get registered to a standard. We have quite a number of, I will call them many standards we have at the moment. We have the common ones, for example, VCS by Verra. And based on the activity you're undertaking or you're proposing to undertake, whether avoidance, removal, or you can now decide on which standard to follow. Each standard, that's a very important decision, because each standard has its own methodology and requirements. And sometimes they even provide for you the templates that you're going to use throughout your project life. After that, then you define the project boundary, or your activities, how far are they expected to reach? Your reduction of emissions, how far are they affecting? Or this can be geographical boundaries, sometimes can extend beyond that. And then in this pre-feasibility, you do baseline and monitoring methodology. What do I mean? Baseline is that all carbon projects will be mapped, or they usually have what we call business as usual, or the baseline. The baseline is what was there at year 0, and then before you start the implementation of activities. Then you implement the activities, then you'll be monitoring this activity and to see how much greenhouse gases removals they are doing or avoidance they are doing. And this monitoring plan is what you define also in the pre-feasibility. And after that, you can decide where the location I talked of, whether you want to be in one country, in multiple countries, in one county, in multiple counties. And lastly, you can decide, is it to be a program or standalone? For example, you can combine 2 activities. You can have a project that is planting trees as well as distributing the clean cook stoves. So that forms a program. It has two things to follow up, and you'll find these 2 things also will adopt different standards. So your carbon project now forms more of a program than a standalone project. And in this step, that is step 1, is what we call assessing and design the concept. And after that, if you're okay and you're successful with your pre-feasibility and you feel, yes, I can proceed with the carbon project, then you proceed to step 2, where you have the project design document. This is a key document. We call it PDD document. And this document is usually submitted to the standard. The standard you identified, that's where you submit this document. And this document is publicly available for every carbon project. For example, for VCS project, if you go to their registry, you will be able to extract a PDD document for every carbon project you have in this world. So what is there in the PDD? Number 1, you define the project. What are you going to do? I'm going to distribute trees to these farmers. These are the methodology, all those details you will define. Number 2, you talk about the additionality. Additionality is the aspect of what extra are you doing. For example, let's say every farmer is planting trees, and so every farmer, you will say, can qualify to claim for carbon credits. But in a carbon project, you have to show what extra are you doing? Or what is unique that you'll do that will lead to reduction in emission or removals, okay? And that is additionality aspect. Then you go to the baseline. You have to define the baseline. You quantify how much of carbon is held in the landscape or in the farm or in the area you're operating from, so that this forms for future claims for carbon, you will always minus or reduce the baseline. So you only paid for what you add compared to the baseline. So in the PDD, you have to account the baseline. And whether, let's say, for example, you're doing a land management project, you have to look into soil carbon. You also have to look on the tree biomass, whether below ground and above ground. And that forms the baseline. For the future monitoring, you'll always be coming back and subtract the baseline. Then at that point, then you're able to calculate emission reduction, like how much over 20 years. Remember, the carbon project can run 10, 20, 30, or up to 50 years. Then in this document, you estimate the emission reduction expected. For example, if you're going to distribute trees and you found that the baseline was this amount, how much carbon removals do you expect from your trees over 10 years, over 20 years, over 50 years? So you can do those calculations, and they are expected to be done in the PDD document. The other one is you also identify the other sustainable development goals that you'll be contributing to. For example, I talked of food security. You have to define all those. And lastly, and not least, is monitoring plan. You have to define how are you going to monitor the activities, how are you going to monitor emission removals and reductions over time. That is key, okay? After you've done that, you submit this document to the standard. It usually goes through public comment period, usually a month. Then after that, they invite a third-party auditor. We call them the VVB, especially for the VCS project. And what happened is that they come in, these are independent auditors. They come in to audit what you're claiming to do in the document, whether it's feasible or not, whether the baseline emissions you've calculated are correct or not. And in so doing, they'll do field visits. They'll do their own calculations as well. And what they do, they'll raise a number of audit issues with you, and you're supposed to give feedback to them. And if you have, and they generate a report, and this report can be positive or negative. We call it a validation report, which they submit to the standard. And it's upon that now the standard look into it. If it was a positive report, then these confirm registration of your project. So it's up to this point that your project gets registered as a carbon project. This can take between 12 to 16 months. And after that, then you go to the next step. Remember, you propose to do some activities, then you go into the implementation of the project. Okay, in the implementation phase, you have to implement what you said you'll do. For example, you're planting trees, you're distributing the cook stoves, and in so doing, you have to follow what you said in the PDD. And this depends on the project. It can take anywhere between anytime. You can talk also depending on the scale of the project. If you're distributing trees to a whole county, this can take you a number of years. For example, some trees will die in year 1, so you have to replace them in year 2. So it can even take up to 5 years to do the implementation of the project. But then what is important is that there is monitoring, which now takes us to the last steps of a carbon project. You have to monitor the activities that you're doing, as it was highlighted in the PD. What you said you'll do in the PDD document, you do in the monitoring report. And in this, monitoring is very key and labor intensive, because let's say you're working with 100,000 farmers, it's expected that you'll monitor them. It can be sample based. If it's a small, it's not so big, or it's big population. And what you do, you have to do actual measurements. Sometimes, in some cases you use models. There are some models depending on the methodology you're adopting. In some cases, I've seen people, especially in the forestry, who are utilizing GIS to to do the monitoring. And remember, all these you'll need to have defined them in the PD document. After that, you've done the monitoring, you submit this monitoring report to the standard, which again invites the auditor to come and verify what you're talking about in the report. And they look, there's back and forth communication where they raise the issues, you address them. And if you get a positive verification report, then you're issued with the credits or verified emission reductions. So this is the credit now, which now it's in form of a certificate. You can decide to sell, get money, or number two, for some organization which they retire. For example, I've seen companies which just want to retire these credits for their own, they want to participate in climate change mitigation. So loosely, that is what a carbon project is. And what I wanted to say is that there can be VCM, voluntary carbon market, or a compliance market. When we talk of voluntary, it's the most dynamic at the moment. And this means it's people who just want to voluntarily contribute to climate mitigation and adaptation, whereas the compliance, as it sounds, they are under direct government or regulatory oversight. It's not by their own likings that they need to participate in the market. But as we speak, VCM is the most common. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John. That's highly informative. We really appreciate. For us to have a really good discussion, I kindly request that we hold on our questions, write down, so that we have Madam Ruth Kerubo to present. Ruth will be telling us about regulatory frameworks for climate finance. So we are sharing Ruth's screen.
Thank you so much.
Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you so much. I hope you can see me.
Yes, we are able to see you, and you're able to see your screen. Welcome, Ruth.
All right. Okay, I'll get right to it because of time. My name is Ruth Kerubo, and I'm delighted to present about the regulatory framework for carbon finance in Kenya. And I will go right ahead to introducing the legal framework in Kenya. So
Yes.
The environment and climate regime in Kenya is enshrined in the Constitution and supported by several sector-specific statutes and policies. In particular, Article 25 of the Constitution of Kenya provides that the international environmental law forms part of Kenyan law. So without further ado, we will go into the international legal framework that Kenya has adopted. And the first is the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, known as the UNFCCC, which Kenya ratified in 1994. So the objective of the UNFCCC treaty is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at levels that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with climate patterns. And since Kenya ratified the UNFCCC, it has therefore committed to the objectives of the UNFCCC. The second is the Kyoto Protocol, which Kenya ratified in 2005. And the Kyoto Protocol established mandatory greenhouse gases, that is GHG emission reduction targets for both industrialized and developing countries to be achieved achieved in the first commitment period of 2008 to 2012, with the aim of reducing their emissions by 5%. There was flexibility provided to Annex 1 countries under the Kyoto Protocol in order to meet their targets by allowing for international emissions trading. So, the Kyoto Protocol establishes the foundation market for the carbon market mechanism. The other agreement is the Paris Agreement, which came into force, and Kenya ratified it in 2016. This agreement, the substantive elements and components of the Paris Agreement are in Articles 4 to 12, which speak on mitigation, greenhouse gas sink and reservoir and REDD+, cooperative approaches, adaptation, loss and damages, finance, and climate change awareness and education. So this agreement sought to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions and in addition set up flexible market-oriented mechanisms, which I have just mentioned, for ensuring low-cost emission reduction. We will now move to the national legislation. And the highest law of the land is the Constitution of Kenya 2010, which addresses issues of environmental governance in various articles, but generally it calls for the sustainable use and conservation of the environment. The Constitution of Kenya provides for many obligations, imposes many obligations on the state, including sustainable exploitation, promotion of achievement and maintenance of a tree cover of at least 10%, protecting and enhancing intellectual property, encouraging public participation, protecting genetic resources and biological diversity, among others. We'll get to the statutory framework of carbon finance. Of course, every law that is made has to spring from the Constitution of Kenya. We have addressed the international legislation that the Constitution permits and which Kenya has ratified. So now we'll go to the statutory framework which Parliament has enacted. And Kenya has enacted various laws on environmental governance, including the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, EMCA 1999, the Forest Conservation and Management Act 2016, the Energy Act 2019, the Climate Change Act 2016, and most recently, the Climate Change Amendment Act 2023. Beginning with the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, EMCA establishes NEMA as the principal government agent charged with the implementation of all policies relating to the environment and to exercise general supervision and coordination of all matters relating to the environment. NEMA is tasked to regulate, enforce, and monitor compliance on levels of GHG emissions on behalf of the National Climate Change Council, which I shall be explaining more about, which council is established by the Climate Change Act. Moving on, we shall go to the Climate Change Act. So the Climate Change Act 2016 was enacted to provide a regulatory framework that catered for an enhanced response to climate change in addition to establishing mechanisms and measure development. With this enactment, Kenya took a concrete step to domesticate the Paris Agreement, which we have discussed above, and made a prescription for Kenya to meet its nationally determined Objectives include mainstreaming climate change responses into development, planning, decision-making, and implementation to build resilience and enhance an adaptive capacity as to the impacts of climate change to the formulation of programs and plans that provide indications for the private sector to contribute in achieving low carbon climate resilient development, to facilitate capacity development for public participation, in climate change responses, to mobilize resources for climate change response, and to integrate climate change into the existing power and functions of all levels of governance. However, it is noteworthy that the Act was not well implemented for various other issues. Now, NDCs, the Kenya adopted the National Climate, and this action plan set out Kenya's climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies, which focus on 7 sectors: agriculture, forestry, water, energy, health, infrastructure, and wildlife. Back the National Treasury Exchange Finance Strategy and Regulations, and the National Climate Change Fund is also vested in the department. And in the strategic plan of the Treasury, the National Treasury recognizes Climate Finance Action Plan development as one of it, and the Climate Change Act faced various challenges, and epitome to that is litigation challenges. However, the Climate Change Act provides for the adoption of the Climate Change Action Plan, and it is through this action plan that various mitigation strategies for the country were set out. Moving on, and get to the next slide. Because of the shortfall of the Climate Change Act, there was need to amend various sections of the same act. So there was the Climate Change Amendment Act 2023, which was passed recently assented to by the President on 1st of September this year. So the Climate Change Amendment Act amends the Climate Change Act 2016. The reason why we are calling it the Climate Change Amendment Act is because the Act has just been assented to, and Kenya Law Reform Commission has not yet harmonized the amendments to the original Act. So until Kenya Law Reform Commission does that, we shall separate the Climate Change Act and the Climate Change Amendment Act 2023. So the Climate Change Amendment Act is a framework that has amended various provisions in the Climate Change Act 2016, through which the Kenyan government has incorporated carbon market policies with the following key objectives. So these are areas that the government and the people of Kenya felt like were lacking in the Climate Change Act, which have been introduced by the Climate Change Amendment Act. We can go back to the sections of the Climate Change Amendment Act to set out clear guidelines for benefit sharing, mechanisms for carbon projects, align the provisions on membership of the council, which was a big litigious issue, for better operations of the council, provide for specific mandates of the cabinet meeting a national authority in compliance with international obligations, and to provide for components relating to carbon market and document. So the Climate Change Amendment Act was bringing out the issues of realization of carbon credits, export and compliance must be regulated. There are various safeguards for carbon projects to be realized, whether it is voluntary or in compliance. There are various safeguards that must be adhered to by project proponents. Number one is environmental impact assessment. In environmental impact assessment, the laws and regulations in the legal framework for the Environmental Management and Coordination Act requires all projects that are likely to have significant environmental impact to undergo an EIA process. So the EIA process involves a detailed analysis of the potential environmental impacts of the project and the development of mitigation measures to address any adverse impact. Number two is community participation. The Climate Change Act requires that communities be involved in the development and implementation of climate change policies and programs. This includes the development of sectoral climate change action plans, the establishment of a climate change fund, and the promotion of public awareness and education on climate change issues, and even benefit sharing, such that if project proponents want to realize carbon credits, then a certain percentage has to go to the community. There's also the issue of monitoring, reporting, and verification. And the Climate Change Act requires that all climate change programs and projects be monitored, reported, and verified to ensure that they are achieving their intended outcomes. The real position of the regulatory framework relating to carbon finance and carbon credits in Kenya is that Kenya is at the inception stage of developing the requisite carbon regulations. Having the Climate Change Amendment Act, which is barely a month old, the Act will require regulation to implement it. So when there is an Act of Parliament, there has to be regulations which provide a step-by-step process of how each and every clause or section of the law will be implemented. So that is lacking. So Kenya is at the inception stage. However, there is a plan to prepare the requisite regulations, and that burden rests on the shoulders of the Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Environment, so that interested candidates can regularize their carbon projects, the carbon credits in the carbon project. Also, the regulations will force all carbon projects to regularize them, to be regularized by the law, such that if a carbon project began, let's say, 2 years ago or 1 year ago, after the signing of this act, that carbon project has to be reported to the requisite lead agency, and that carbon credit project must comply to the existing laws. So although Kenya is at the inception stage of implementing or realizing both and regulating the voluntary and the compliance market, the subsidiary legislations to the Climate Change Act are pending. But once they have been published and gazetted by the Cabinet Secretary, all voluntary and compliance projects will be regularized according to the law. However, noting that carbon projects are most of the time land-based. This for land-based projects. There's the voluntary market, which is thriving. The compliance market has not been implemented because of lack of a robust regulatory framework, but the voluntary market has been realized by different proponents because of the issue of the land rights, that is for land-based voluntary projects and other sectors. I think that is, I have a conclusion, the last slide. Yes, with regard to the carbon measures that the country has in place for environmental and carbon governance, Kenya is in the inception stage in development of the requisite regulatory and compliance components that shall facilitate investment in carbon credits, and this is heavily affected by the compliance market. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for really that informative, especially helping us understand the different aspects of the law. There are things that I've really understood that I had a different view, but now my view is clarified, and I look forward to the discussion. So participants, please write your questions on the chat to allow us to engage Ruth and to get to benefit from her knowledge regarding the regulatory framework of carbon projects in Kenya. Our next presenter is Anne Maina. Anne Maina will be sharing her screen, and she will be providing us with some fantastic case studies in Kenya and sharing her knowledge. And then once Anne is done, we'll be able now to start our discussions. So keep your questions coming, please. Anne, karibu sana. You may want to unmute.
Yes, thank you so much, Shem, for the invite and great presentation by the people who have been presenting. So let me just put up my screen in a second. Yes. So at the moment, we've been told about the procedure to create carbon projects. Also learned about the political landscape that is governing the carbon market that are actually coming up right now. So I will present a case study of what is happening across the globe with a more focus on what is happening in East Africa. So my name is Anne Maina. I do lead projects in East Africa at Bumitra. So Bumitra is an organization that is bringing carbon credits closer to the farmers. And we've been privileged enough to work in 4 continents as of now. And we initially launched our project in Kenya last year, and we are rapidly expanding into other regions. So this means that carbon credit projects are actually happening, and they're actually very accessible to so many people who are doing great work for the environment. So to give a background on why it's even necessary to have these carbon credit projects, we know that climate change, this is a non-negotiable, that climate change has caused such a giga-scale problem for many of us. And we've also seen that the soil are highly eroded, and this happens every year. So just to understand a bit on what we're doing at Bumitra, our focus is more around farmers and also around soil carbon. So there are different pools of carbon where we have like from above the ground carbon. We also have direct air carbon capture, where you use machines to directly capture the carbon from the environment. We have other people who absorb carbon through like the oceans and the mangroves. But for us as Bumitra, our focus is on soil carbon. So with climate change at play and also with soil erosion highly degrading our lands, we are seeing that our farmers, mostly our smallholder farmers around the world, are actually struggling to provide for their families. So I would like to introduce you to one of the farmers that we are working with in Kenya. So meet Kavemba. Kavemba is one of the farmers you're working with from Makueni County, and we all know the conditions that are there in Makueni. It's quite a dry area, but it has the potential to actually be regenerated through improved agricultural practices. And initially, she had an income of like $5 income, and this is not enough to help her adapt to as well as mitigate the coming changes that are actually coming. And her main source of income is agriculture. So how do you work with farmers like Kavemba to be able to create sustainable solutions, not just for you, but also globally? So that is where Bumitra's solution comes in. So at Bumitra, we are building an ecosystem that aims to empower the 570 million smallholder farmers across the world, and we plan to enable them to adapt improved agricultural practices. And on top of that, we are layering access to technology that is remote sensing technology and also artificial intelligence that is not easily accessible to them, probably because of the cost factors, etc. So, but what are these practices that we at Bumitra are actually doing with the farmers to be able to help them adapt to as well as mitigate the climate change? So many people might call them climate smart agriculture. Somebody else might say organic agriculture. Another person might say regenerative agriculture. There are so many terms to actually define what these practices are, but when you look at them, they trickle down to things that are actually going to help the farmers improve their productivity and also enhance their resilience and also reduce their emissions to the environment. So we do promote simple things such as we do promote simple practices such as minimum tillage. This is where you till minimally or you do not till at all. So that would be considered as zero tillage. The other thing we do is we promote practices like use of cover crops. We also promote use of crop rotation. We also promote things such as intercropping and also use of organic manure, among other practices. And the reason we promote these practices is because they have the potential to increase the soil organic carbon. So going back to what I had initially said, we are more focused on soil organic carbon. So the practices that we are promoting should either hold the carbon in the soil or actually increase the carbon in the soil. That is either by trapping from the environment or through the whole process of organic decomposition. That is a whole technical matter that I will not get into. So we've already promoted those practices. Our farmers are now adapting those practices. They have increased their soil organic carbon, but how initially did we get to even promoting those practices? We do work with partners, and partners would be organizations that are trusted by the farmers, organizations that know where the farmers are, and organizations that are also able to bring that behavioral change to be able to help the farmers adapt these practices. So at the moment in Kenya, we are working with organizations like Yara, who have a regenerative agriculture program, and they've been working with farmers for a while now to help them adapt better practices, the practices that I had initially mentioned. We are also working with the Farm to Market Alliance, /CGA, that is the Cereal Growers Association. And the FTMA, that is the Farm to Market Alliance, is backed by the World Food Programme, among other partners that we are working with at the moment. So those partners are the people who know where the farmers are, and they're the people who are enabling the farmers to adapt those improved agricultural practices, which leads to the increase in the soil carbon. So how do we know what amount of soil carbon has been increased in the soil? That is where Bumitra's expertise comes in. and we bring in our remote sensing technology that is able to monitor and give real-time insights on what is exactly happening on a specific farm. So we do feed that data into artificial intelligence with also some ground soil data that we have collected to be able to calibrate our models, and we're able to keep track of the changes in the soil carbon stock over a period of time. So right now, we've been able to measure and we know the amount of carbon that we have in the soil, but all we have at the moment is just the carbon and the quantity. So how do you actually bring it to the market for it to be verified, for it to even generate revenue that is going to go back to the farmer, who is the person who has worked really hard to increase their soil organic carbon? So we go through a process by Verra. So initially, we've heard of organizations like Gold Standard, we've heard of Plan Vivo, we've heard of Verra. So for us, we use the Verra certification, who certify our carbon credits. And if they meet the standard requirements, they now issue us with those carbon credits. And now those carbon credits are what are sold to organizations that have a net zero target, or organizations that are moving towards more sustainable practices and they would like to offset their carbon. So we've now sold the carbon, the carbon credit, there's now revenue that has been generated from this process. A majority of this revenue goes back to the farmer because they are the people who have worked really hard to adapt the improved agricultural practices. And going back a bit to the benefits that the farmer is getting, it's not only about the carbon revenue, but when they adapt these improved agricultural practices, their soil becomes healthy. And that means that there's going to be some ripple effect in terms of their productivity. And this is also going to also increase their income. So it's a whole holistic view on how we can be able to increase our farmers' resilience and also reduce and mitigate climate change, but also increasing their revenue. So just to need to be conscious of the time, just to give a brief on how our technology works. We do have 100 plus multispectral satellites, which we combine with ground truth data. So this is the soil samples that I was talking about. And then this information is fed into our proprietary artificial intelligence and deep learning predictions, which can help us now monitor what are the changes in the carbon stock over a period of time. And then we're able to not only get insights on the soil organic carbon, but you're also able to get what is the nutrient level in a certain farmer's farm, and even more precise, what is the nutrient level in a certain corner or a certain point in these farmers, in a certain farmer's land. And not only that, we also get to monitor the moisture, the soil moisture in the farmers' farms. So this information is incorporated in an app and put into easy digestible information that the farmer can be able to easily make sense of, so that they can be able to make better decisions for their farms. And we've also found that with the fact that we're doing this with our technology, we're able to do it at scale, and it also helps us reduce the measurement cost with up to 99%. So these are the insights that we do get. We are able to monitor the soil carbon. We are also able to monitor the soil moisture, and we're also able to monitor the soil nutrients. And these are things such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So as I initially mentioned, we are working in 4 continents, and we are rapidly expanding into newer geographies. So at the moment, we have a project in India, which is a project. Our target was 500K acres onboarded into our program. And at the moment, we have a total of 300,000 plus acres of land. We also have a project in Mexico and its neighboring surroundings. So this is a grasslands project. So for Bumitra, we do have two types of projects. We have croplands projects and we have grasslands projects. Croplands projects revolve around farmers and helping them adapt improved agricultural practices that I mentioned previously, and this helps them increase their soil organic carbon. And our second project, that is the grassland, this revolves around adapting better grazing management practices so that you can be able to conserve the soil carbon in the lands that we have. So in Mexico, we do have a grassland project with 2 million acres of land. And in Brazil, we do have two projects, a croplands and a grassland project amounting to 1 million plus acres of land. And then in Kenya, our project is registered in East Africa, that is Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania. At the moment, we are working in Kenya and rapidly expanding to the other regions. So we have seen a lot of expression of interest towards like carbon farming, and also how organizations and how our communities can benefit from carbon credits. We have received tremendous support from our partners and also some of our investors, such as Yara, the World Food Programme, Syngenta, Mercy Corp, Rabobank, WEF, UNCDF, just to mention a few, because they have offered great support to ensuring that the carbon credits that we're generating are getting trickled down to the communities that we're working with. So this is our proof of concept, that it's possible to actually bring these carbon credits to the farmers, and we work with individual farmers. At the moment, in Kenya, we have onboarded a total of 135,000 acres of land, which have been from close to 5,000 farms, and we are currently working with 6 partners, and we are looking at expanding to more counties, since at the moment we are working in 24 counties. In the next phase, which will be next year, around mid next year, we are looking at engaging all the 47 counties of Kenya and also expanding to the newer geographies. So going back to what I had initially mentioned about incorporating all this information in an app in a digestible way, and this is easily accessible to the farmers who are part of our project, and they do not have to pay for these insights. So this is how our app looks like, where if you have been onboarded into our project with either one farm or a couple of farms, you're able to get insights which are very specific to each and every farm, and you can be able to see how your plants are faring. So you'll be able to see what is the plant health in like various areas in that farm. You can also be able to track the soil moisture. You can also be able to track the nitrogen. You can also be able to track the phosphorus and the potassium. And we are slowly but surely concentrating more nutrients so that we can be able, more nutrients and more insights, so we can be able to help our farmers adapt better practices and make better decisions for their farms. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. That is it from my end. Back to you, Shem.
Thank you so much, Anne-Maina, and giving us examples of possibilities that are happening in the country currently. So we welcome our listeners to help us in the discussion. I have one question yes, we have Grace Mutudo. Yes, madam. Yes, Grace. Grace, your hand was raised, so.
No, I was actually just appreciating the presentation.
Fantastic, great.
Okay.
So, One of the questions that have been asked again and again by many people when they read some of the things we do about carbon is how many acres would be adequate for a carbon project? They're asking, can I have a carbon project as an individual? How many acres do I need? John, Anne, what do you want to say?
Wow.
Sure.
Okay, you can go on. I'll have my input.
Sure. There's no straight answer to that, honestly. So I think for you to even develop a carbon project, John talked about it, there's a process to it. So you need to be cognizant of that. And you also need to look at your capacity to actually implement this project, because specifically, I think a lot of cost goes into the MRV, that is the monitoring, the reporting, and the verification. So you need to look at your capacity to actually do that. But it also depends with organizations. We have group projects, and we do have people who implement projects individually. So it would make more sense realistically, just coming from a neutral point of view, it would make more sense to do this at a scale so it can be able to cut and sort of and go back to having the impact that it's actually intended to have in, because this is an incentive to actually encourage you to adapt better practices and to keep adapting those better practices on the long term, since carbon projects are a long-term project. So if you encounter a lot of investment costs, at the end of it all, it might not make sense to you. So the impact of the carbon credits revenue might not be doing the exact work that they were initially intended to do. Passing it on to you, John.
Hi, John. Yes, it's a common question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you. I think I don't want to break hearts. Yeah. So the thing is, for every project, you have to look at the economic side. And in carbon project, when we are doing a feasibility study, one of the components we do is what we call a feasibility study. And one of it is in that we do economic modeling. This is where you look into, based on the activities and based on the scale you have, what is the carbon generation profile? How much carbon can you generate in year 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 50? And looking into that also, we add the costs. How much do you need in year 1, going every year monitoring and inviting the auditors and all that? Then at what level does it make economic sense? Then can it make a profit? To be frank, if you're dealing with acreage less than 20 acres or hectares, let me use the hectares here, it would be hard for you to achieve economies of scale. So what my answer here is, you're an individual farmer, it makes sense to join an ongoing program. For example, what Bumitra is doing, becoming one of their farmer, as opposed to be independently starting your own carbon project. Yeah, that's the feeling I have.
Maybe John, in some of the projects that you've participated, what are the ranges of farmers, especially smallholder farmers?
So what we usually
the numbers.
Yes, we aggregate farmers and looking at, for example, looking at Western Kenya, the average acreage is less, it's 1 to 2 acres. And what happened is that we found that unless we're able to get 30,000 plus farmers, it doesn't make economic sense. So we are talking of roughly the same size, 30 hectares or more. Yeah.
Thank you so much. There's a question.
Can I be allowed to ask a question, because I want to leave?
Yes, Prof. Yes.
Okay. Mine is to Anne Maina. How does one become part of your farmer? I'm operating in Laikipia, where the soil carbon is very, very, very poor, and the soil organic matter. And from the app that you have, is it possible to join other farmers in that area whom you are already working with? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Esther. That's a good question, actually, because I know a lot of people do have a similar question. So we as Bumitra are an ag tech company. So we bring in the technology. We also help you to monetize the carbon. And what we do is we leverage on our partnership model. So we work with organizations that are already working with farmers. We do have a couple of organizations that might be working close to Laikipia and also probably other counties that might be of interest to you. And those would be the main organizations you would probably look out for, such as Yara. I know Yara do work around Laikipia. I am not sure if our other partners are working in that region. But at the moment, we have closed onboarding of new farmers, but this is just for phase 1. So we will have more cycles, and we are expecting to open phase 2 around mid next year. So that will be the point where we'll be getting more farmers into our project. So if you're interested in being part of our project, we can get in touch and I can link you to one of our partners and you can be able to take the conversation from there.
Thank you very much. You could then kindly share your contacts. The chair will communicate. I'll check them from the chair.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yes. Sorry, Chair, I have to leave.
We appreciate it.
It was a great webinar.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate that you managed to come. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne, for that clarification. For our farmers, it's always good to work in groups. Now, there's a question Eric is asking, and let me see if I've gotten it well. Yeah, Eric is asking, how many trees will you need to accumulate 1 ton of carbon? Eric, 1 tree can be able to accumulate even 10 tons of carbon. We need to talk with you about how to estimate the carbon in trees. Just chat them Kuya, and then I'll tell you by looking on a tree how much carbon it has. There's a question to Anne. What's the difference between the approaches Bumitra is undertaking and the agroecological farming approaches?
Yeah. I think the challenge that comes with that is the many terms that we use to define the same things. We talk about climate smart agriculture, we talk about regenerative agriculture, we talk about agroecosystem practices, but all these things are the same. When you look at what are these practices, these are the same practices actually. So us as Bumitra, we do not promote any specific practice, but we help the farmers realize what are the practices that could actually increase my soil organic carbon, and based on their ability to adapt those practices, they can be able to now adapt those practices, because people have different capacities and you cannot force people to adapt any practice that you yourself think is more conducive for them. So agroecological practices, regenerative agriculture practices, whatever Bumitra is doing, all are the same thing.
Okay, thanks. It's so much changing, and now they are talking about transformation of agricultural systems. Okay, there's another question here. How does Bumitra onboard farmers? Anne has explained that when responding to Professor Kahangi. What is the average price of carbon? Would like to handle that. What is the average price of carbon?
Before I answer that, there's never a definitive price, number one. Each carbon unit or verified emission reduction unit, which is usually in tons, has a different price tag attached to it. For example, if you have a project which has other SDGs attached to it, for example, in your generation of credit, you're able to improve livelihood, you're able to improve food security, the price can go high, while others can go low. So it keeps fluctuating, and at the moment it should be between 5 and 10 USDs per ton of verified units. Yeah. So, but it's rising. That's the good news.
Thank you. maybe John and Anne or Ruth, what you want to say is that the 5 or 10 USDs do not go direct to the farmer, because at one moment you're training farmers and you tell them carbon sales at 5 per ton and your tree can accumulate 10 tons of carbon, and they say, I want to join.
Yeah, sure. There is quite a lot of, to implement a carbon project is cost intensive. As I said, that's why you even need a minimum number of farmers to make it profitable. So, and you continue monitoring for every successful verification process. For you to earn the credit, they have to have monitoring being undertaken. So there is a lot of costs implication that happens. And I've seen most projects that we have in Kenya do not even promise farmers direct cash, because it doesn't make the amount of money that gets to the farmer, it's not significant enough, for individual follow-up for farmers. Remember, for you to be able to know you're going to get 10,000 Kenya shillings in year one, then someone needs to have come to your farm or using technologies to assess the change over that 1 year. So in most cases, what you find is that you find programs which group farmers, farmer joiners, farmer groups, so the returns comes to farmer groups or to the communities, and communities can identify the project they want to undertake. For example, they may need a borehole, maybe they will need a school, and then the project, the credits, the money coming from the credits can be used to finance these common projects, as opposed to each farmer getting money into their pocket. Because remember, we are talking about a farmer who has a 0.5 of an acre. How much do you think will get? It will be too small amount that the farmer may feel not motivated to continue in the project.
Okay, thank you. There's another question here. A researcher in carbon credits, when you develop or come up with projects, it's hard to know how to go about it, even though the passion is there. Is there a fellowship, a mentorship program, or one can join to learn more or be part of such initiative? A quick answer to that. A colleague says they're interested, but then they have capacity challenges. What would be the options of joining to learn or be part of the initiatives?
Wow. I'll take this back to you, Shem. Probably, you know.
Okay. Yeah, so our colleague, we ask you to get in touch with the Research and Innovations Directorate, and then we'll be able to search and match and link you to appropriate entities that can support your desires. What is the average in kilograms of carbon one avocado tree will produce from air?
Hello.
Yes.
Maybe Shem, I can answer that question on the issues of why it is hard to launch a carbon project in Kenya.
Yes, yes,
sorry for interrupting you. Part of the reason is because Kenya, for a long time, has lacked a clear legislative framework, a clear legal framework for regulating carbon projects. And as I mentioned in my presentation, is that Kenya is at the inception stage where we have just assented to the Climate Change Act, which awaits further regulations for regulation of both voluntary and compliance, the compliance market. So my response to the lady who has asked that question is that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Regulation, and soon all carbon projects in Kenya will be registered and regulated by the government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. There's a question on what is the average in kilograms a carbon with one avocado tree will produce from air. Maybe just a quick one for this. The amount of carbon stored varies from tree to tree, but also from age. So the amount will vary from age. And Joseph, just get in touch. We can give you some quick tips on estimating the amount of carbon in individual trees. The other question is, Anne, how do you deal with farmer attrition? Question 2. Could you give briefly a glimpse of Bumitra monitoring system? How do you deal with farmer attrition?
I do not understand the first question, but I can get to the second one. A glimpse of how Bumitra does the monitoring. So we do have levels to this where you have been working with the farmers and these farmers have been adapting the good practices. So we ensure that there is that record keeping at the farm level. This helps you keep track of what the farmer is doing. And this is actually good backup when you are going through the project validation. We also have incorporated the app, that is the app I was talking about, that has the insights. So we not only have those insights in the app, but we also have something we call the farmer diary, where we're trying to see how we can promote the transition from, how do you put it, conventional bookkeeping, where you have a book and you write that, you write the activities that are going on in your farm, to a more digital platform that can easily keep track and even give you like a dashboard and do some analysis of data to help you easily understand what exactly is happening. So that is at farm level, but now there's also the technology that Bumitra is bringing in. So we do have the remote sensing technology that is able to give you, to help you know what are the changes in the carbon stock over a period of time. And with that, you can be able to see that probably in 2020, my carbon stock was a bit low, but in 2021 it increased. So you can be able to know that I need to adapt improved and better practices. So it's a mix of different technologies just to ensure that it's as comprehensive as possible.
Thank you, Anne. I hope Anne Mora has benefited. We have a question from Benson Wataka. He's asking some insight. How does carbon trading work? Is that part of alternative investment trading on capital markets? And specifically, how does it work in Kenya? I don't know whether Ruth is there or someone, or Anne, just briefly, because our time is also moving, to now move this out of carbon finance to carbon trading.
Okay, thank you. I will take this. Well, it could be that it is the capital market is incorporating it, but as of May 2021, there was an announcement that Kenya is in its advanced stages of establishing the Kenya emissions trading system. Well, this is a system that would be under the Nairobi Securities Exchange, and this was brought about by an interest by investors in the environment, social and governance matters, where they wanted to participate in emissions trading. However, I am yet to participate in such trading, but I am aware that there has been the development of the Kenya emissions trading system. And once it is operational, this system will allow companies and organizations to buy and sell emissions. However, I have not encountered anyone who has done that, but I know there has been a plan for a long time of developing an emissions trading system.
Thank you so much, Ruth. I think one of the limitations Ruth has really made us aware is the framework that is lacking. Do you have any other question that I might have missed, or someone who wants to ask a question? Yeah, I had a question on transaction cost. My question, yes, there's a question to John. There's a question to John, maybe it's coming. So, John, how can a farmer who wants to develop a carbon project or a big part, what are the, let's say, guiding remarks. What should they do? You know, where should they go? Who should they meet? Do they go to the governor?
So thank you. There are a number of options. Depending on where you're from, it's number one, checking if there's any existing carbon project in the area. I want to notify you, as it may sound green in Kenya, is that at the moment we have around 48 carbon projects, purely from Verus registry. These may be in different stages of establishment. Some are registered, some are being developed. So it tells you the intensive or the amount of carbon project we already have on the ground. So the thing is, number one is to know whether in your area there's a carbon project which is coming up or being proposed and trying to join. Okay, that forms a very easy route. The other route now, if acreage and resources allow, is now to develop a carbon project from scratch. And this, what it entails is getting someone, an individual, who is conversant with feasibility and also PDD writing, or organization. There are quite a number of international organizations which are good in this. Then contracting them to get you up and running, to get started. And out of that, then you can have an individual carbon project. But as I said, there is a minimum acreage that will make this economically viable. So the easier route will be to join an existing carbon project in the region that you're from. Or alternatively, then form a group, a farmer group, or join a whole village and start activities that would now invite someone to come and put you together into a carbon project. That is also very possible, where you can try and get farmers together or your friends together and meet the minimum acreage that is required. Then invite someone who can now support you in coming up, getting the project registered as a carbon project, and then you can directly be able to earn the credits.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, John. As we conclude, there's a question that I would not like to go untouched. Are there disadvantages of a carbon project, so that we are not necessarily just throwing phrases and praises, and we know literature outside there has different opinions also on carbon project. John, can you, or Ruth, before you leave?
I can start. As you noted from my presentation, is that carbon projects are very complex. It can take you up to 5 years before you can even get a single credit. Yeah. So it's number one, complex. Number two, labor intensive. Number three, requires specific skills to get it up and running. And at the moment, we struggle that in the country. The other one, which I'll throw back to Ruth, is that for a long time, we've not had the policies being clear. Even up to now, the new climate change policy of 2023, it talks of how to distribute the revenues, but there's quite a bit of misinformation, and these, until the regulations come out to guide, there's still some gray areas with these policies in Kenya on how to go about it. So policy has been a key hindrance on the same. The other one is that you find at the moment, the key people who are able to finance a carbon project, because becomes a very expensive. These are international organizations, and therefore what it means is that you have to sign off your rights to the credits. If you're a farmer and now you receive pre-financing to undertake activities in a carbon project, you have to sign off your rights to these credits. And this is usually in the voluntary carbon market, because you as a farmer, you hold the title deed to your land, so you are ultimate owner of these credits. So for you to participate, you have to sign off these rights. And it's important for farmers to be enlightened on what they are signing off, because you're signing off into 10, 20, 30 years period, which will even affect your next generation. So it needs a lot of enlightenment. I see the new policy, yes, it has some guidance on the participation of the county government, on the national government, in carbon rights transfer between farmers and the carbon developers. So this was missing previously, but also needs to be put in front as we proceed, because these are the key things that you need to be careful when you're joining a carbon project. Others, yes, quite a very scientific approach. It's not an easy one, as Dr. Shem will tell you. To quantify, a lot of quantification, a lot of model use, and all these skills sometimes makes you to be dependent on someone else. It's not something you can undertake as an individual, which makes it you can only progress as far as you have someone who can buy into your ideas. So yes, those are a number of key issues I can pick from carbon projects.
Thank you so much, John. I think the issue of benefit sharing comes in strongly, and safeguards. Ruth talked about safeguards. How do you ensure safeguards are in place and the locals are not either exploited, or the carbon project doesn't take place at the expense of livelihoods, or livelihoods are not exploited? Please allow us to end today at this time. My appreciation to Ruth, my appreciation to John, my appreciation to Anne for helping us discuss this topic. I know there are some questions that may not have been answered in this platform. I've shared the directorate's email. Please reach us at director.research@jquat.ac.ke for any question that you feel has not been answered, or any link that you feel you like to pursue further after this. Thank you so much for participating in this webinar.